So we're going to be working with the workbook, Creative Solutions to Challenging Situations. And for those of you who have already purchased it and have it in hand, then I'm going to ask you to sort of look at some of the pages of it and to really investigate how you would use it for yourself, or maybe one other person, or a small group, or for training, for coaching. And for some of you who are certified, you may have a variety of uses. For those of you who are simply interested in this, you may be using it just for yourself, which is fine. We want to address all those. So the very first thing at the very top of the first page, other than the cover, is looking at a donut. And we use the analogy of the donut. And what we ask is, I want you to, for a second, close your eyes and describe a donut to me. So Christine, I'm going to have you actually do that. I want you to close your eyes and describe a donut for me.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Describing a donut, fluffy and round, sometimes stuff on the inside or sprinkles and chocolate on the outside, different colors.
Okay, thank you, Christine. That was lovely. Beth, just close your eyes and describe a donut for me.
Describing requires unmuting. I would say cakey and covered in icing, maybe some sprinkles.
Okay. All right, we're getting you two have taken. Okay, Emilio, how about you describe a donut for me?
I would describe it as a round thing with a hole in the middle covered in
You describe it as a round thing with a hole in the middle covered with
glazing.
Glaze. Okay, cool. So now we had 3 different people describing a donut. Now, 2 of them never even mentioned a hole. Emilio mentioned a hole, but he mentioned a round thing with a hole in the middle covered with glaze. In no way did people focus on what was missing in a major way. What they focused on, what was present, what was there, what was still possible. And that's what's not being done with dementia. And so what we see is dementia is the whole. And all we talk about is the whole. What are people missing? What can't they do anymore? What's not working? And that, of course, leads us to focus on the negative, what's not there, rather than, okay, well, what is still there? Because if we could pay attention to what's still there, what's still possible, what we could be paying attention to instead, we might find it a little more enjoyable. We're also going to find we're going to have to work it off if we eat too many of those things. But the idea of the donut is to recognize when people are living with dementia, yes, there are going to be things that are going to be missing. But if we could, in a challenging situation, get creative by figuring out, okay, well, yes, what's missing, but what's possible. So Emilio took a very practical approach to this. He described it. Here's what's here. Here's what's missing. But there's glaze on the part that's still there, which could make it really sweet and sticky, or it could make it slippery, or no, he was really finite. He is really sure that a donut is that. Whereas the 2 women were like, oh, it could be this, it could be that. And so Emilio describes everything that we label as dementia more like Alzheimer's. And the 2 ladies were going, well, it could be Lewy body, it could be frontal temporal. I don't know, maybe posterior cortical atrophy. It could be just MCI. It's hard to tell. It might be just depression. They were more, it could be this or that. Whereas Amelia was very finite. So from the very start of this booklet, guide, workbook, we're wanting people to really look at things the way they typically look at them, and then get themselves to pause for a second and try to see the other side. Try to look at it differently. Try to, rather than always thinking about subtraction, what's missing, think about substitution, what's changed, what's possibly different here. So when we look at that first page, go ahead, Christine, if you can hold that first page up. There's the picture, and then there's some text. So we created the workbook because people tend to like to take things in visually. And when we're mature adults, many people like to get the words and be able to look at the words and think about the words and process it. And at least half the population of human beings would prefer to do it on their own. They want to go do this thing by themselves, particularly when dementia is got so much stigma attached to it, or you're feeling bad about your responsibility or role in this. And what we want to do is say, let's get creative. Let's really look at this. And so the very first thing we started with was the donut. So now I'm curious, Beth and Christine, I won't ask Emilio yet because I know what I'm going to get there. Maybe not. For you two, if you were thinking with perhaps just for yourself, what did that imagery and that discussion bring up for you? What happened?
Such a not being silly here, but it was very for me, very aha. And how many times do I tend to focus on what's wrong or what's missing or what's not happening versus looking at, wow, look at what I do have to be thankful for, or what do I do have to work with, or what is going right?
So humans are pretty much designed to notice those things that, well, that's not right. Well, that's not fitting. Well, that's in the wrong place. Or we notice those things which irritate a little bit. In other words, your reticular activating system, the part of your brain that notices things and wants you to pay attention to them, it's always on the alert for a little bit of threat awareness. Because you want to survive, you want to thrive, you want to do well. And the first thing you got to do is notice, is there a threat out there? And so the challenge is, do we see challenges as opportunities or threats? The possibility. But there's another piece of it. What you then said is, oh, well, if I could look at what's working right, maybe what I could see, how could I use what's working right, maybe to reduce the sense of what's not working, or how could I address it or make it work? Cool, thanks. Beth, what about you? What did you think about and notice when we were talking about all that?
I thought it was funny. It's somewhat similar, but sort of a variation on a theme from Christine's. When I pictured a donut, and I know we've talked about this before, but in truth, I just kind of put myself through the exercise. Picture a donut. And I did picture the whole, but it didn't make it less than. I knew the hole was there, but I didn't have any problem. And I still got that dreamy look on my face about how great a donut would be right now. Even though there really was a hole, it was just part of what it was. And it didn't give me judgment in a negative sense on any other part of the gloriousness that is a donut.
Oh, so interesting. So your reticular activating system didn't actually go to that other place where Christine immediately went to the world of life and what I have and what I don't have and big picture and sort of thinking about that. And yours was just really practically, donuts do have holes, but they're fine, and, as I'm thinking about it, what do I like about a donut? And so your reticular activating was sort of like, yeah, donuts, that's what they are. And, this is the good part. And yeah, there is a hole in it, but that's sort of part of being a donut.
Yeah. And knowing this was a webinar about brain change and knowing that the donut analogy was our launch point, it's not that much of a leap for them to think, my gosh, the minute I think of dementia, everything about it is everything I see in the world and hear in the world is this negative connotations. And this is where I think it really links up beautifully with Christine's thought. But yet the donut doesn't have there's a whole part of it missing, much the same way that skills that used to be are no longer. Tissue that used to be is no longer. And yet for a donut, it was just part of it. I could still enjoy it. I think about that way with my friends that I'm connected to that are living with dementia. I think about them as my friends. I don't think about dementia first. They're my donuts.
Yeah. So you are actually equating people living with dementia as the donuts. And so that's a whole different way of looking at it. But what we've done in these two examples I could do in a support group, I could do in a training gig, I could do in a consultation. So I could say, so where are the holes that you're noticing and what's still there that you picked up? So it gives me a launching place. So the workbook, as it is, can be done individually. And you can go through this workbook for yourself and take yourself through this workbook and come up with what are some ways I can start to see what's possible. Or I can use this as a shared task that we're going through, and we do one section, we do one page, we do one exercise, and we come back and talk about it. And it could be in a workshop, or it could be over time, you know? So here's the tricky part. Christine, what's on the bottom of page 1? Show us what's in the little box down there. Yep. Can you sort of share what's in the little box down there while you're there?
Yes. In addition to your picture, are you more focused on what a person is still capable of or on the abilities they have lost? Is one of the questions. Number 2, are you looking at the relationship between you and that person or their dementia first? Have you considered how your behavior and focus is impacting the very thing you wish wasn't happening?
So there's more questions, but what's in the workbook compared to what we did in this session so far? What'd you notice?
Well, very similar questions.
Yeah. So for half of a group that really wants to do this on their own, the workbook is set up so that it continues to ask questions, not make just statements or judge. It's really meant to have you reflect and to think. So this workbook is really meant to be read, look, think, consider, and then possibly if you have that desire or you're in a situation, talk about that before you move forward. Particularly if there's one person living with dementia, you're a primary for them, and there are other people in the mix. The two of us, the person living with dementia, and me, the primary, maybe if it's early in the condition, we could both be looking at this information and determine how are we seeing things similar or differently at this point, so that we start to really look in the mirror at ourselves and then ask the person to look and let's see, what do we notice? So if I ask a person early in dementia, tell me what you think when you see a donut. Close your eyes and describe a donut. The question I had, or in the middle of the dementia or at late stage dementia, when is it that they would no longer see a donut as a donut? When would the whole start being the thing that they focus on?
Wow. So you're talking about the person living with dementia, is that what you said, Teepa?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I think it totally depends on the person, right? You've met one person living with dementia, you've met one person. Yeah. But the first thing that comes to mind is during that state and that time of grief, bereavement, early on, I have this diagnosis, and if you've actually got a good provider that's willing to have a conversation, the reality isn't fun. This is life-altering, life-changing. We know it is a terminal illness. And if we don't leave space for that place to grieve what I thought I had, what I thought I'm going to lose, what I know.
A jelly-filled donut, and now I'm a cake donut with a hole in the middle.
Yeah, and the hole's getting bigger, I think. That's what they told me.
Yeah.
I need to figure out where I may be a place where the person that I'm with can hear where I am in my processing, maybe.
Yeah. And so I think we start, unfortunately, way too far away from having these kind of discussions. Talking with someone who's living with dementia, if you were viewing yourself as a jelly-filled donut before, are you still a donut when you have a hole?
Yeah.
But if you're not willing to let go of the jelly-filled donut, you're going to get real disappointed when they don't have any jelly-filled donuts, and you're not one. And not everybody was a jelly-filled donut before. You know what? Some people have some brain differences. It's called neurodiversity. Some people are different from birth. They're different in adolescence. They're different for different reasons. I mean, we're all different. And so this idea that because I'm different than you, I'm less than you. But when I look at myself over time, if I see myself as changing and feeling like less, is there a way to have a conversation where we start talking about what's still there that has value, that can find pleasure and joy, that you really are feeling like you can keep your body and your brain working, and that you're able to enjoy your life, even though you aren't the donut you were before. So, we'll move forward. So I'm going to let's see, Christine, just pick a page.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Mm-hmm.
First page I come to is number 7.
Okay. So describe for us number 7. And Beth, if you would go ahead maybe and see if in a second you can pull it up. So what do you got on number 7?
I've got these big open spaces.
Oh.
And I have anger and sadness, bargaining and accepting. Then I have some questions. How might these reflections guide you to make a change? Okay, so it feels like maybe we've started in the middle of something. Right.
So what do you think you should do with that? If you just flip the page open and you're thinking, ooh, you see that first, because often you might see that page first. Mm-hmm. So what are you going to do?
I'm going to look back at the previous page.
Oh, okay.
And realize that, this is talking about grief.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're starting with, in this workbook, you're always going to find that we start with an experience. And the experience we're starting with in each of these segments is a little piece of written content. There'll be a picture. There's almost always a visual image. And then there'll be some content. So I'm going to give you guys a few seconds here to basically hear some words, which is, we'll give you the words. You can look at them. You know, it's pretty common to experience feelings of grief and loss. You know, there's lots of changes going on with dementia. And there's changes in relationships and abilities and time. And then there's this famous person, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who identified 5 stages of grief. Now, we're not exactly sure. We don't actually go into the stages, and she didn't either by the end of the work that she did. She said there are 5 states of feeling or dealing with grieving, and you can flip-flop around and jump around. But there are 5 of these states of emotional reaction, this sense of loss or grief. And you can have these, and each individual will go through them. So the tricky part about dementia is it doesn't settle down, and it keeps changing and keeps changing. So if we go down to the bottom of the page, this is going to give you a chance. Yeah, there you go. Before you move forward, we wanted you to read this. So thinking about that information, we're going to have you do some reflecting. And that's what these boxes are for. The boxes are for you to actually take your fingers and take your paper and take your pen and actually kinesthetically do something in those boxes. So using this space to reflect and self-assess, write or draw a current grief state for all people. Where are you? Where are you in your grieving? And where is everyone else in your group around this person? So you could be the person living with, you could be a carer, you could be somebody who's related, you could be friends, you could be children. Where do you think everybody is? So denial is one of those states when I'm fine. And this isn't, I don't really think I have dementia. I think what I have is depression. And I think if I take the pills that they've given me, or I may have dementia, but that med that they gave me, that slows it down. Now, the reason we use the word denial is that what we know about these conditions and what we know about the situation for this individual, our perception of that individual that's inaccurate. But so this word denial comes from us. We look at that person and we go, I think they're in denial. When I'm in denial, it's tricky because it's just not true. I mean, I truly believe that this pill, and that's where the idea of placebos come from, actually. I think this pill I'm taking is going to make it better. I can be taking a placebo, but some people who take placebos actually do improve. And some people, just because you tell me the pill is going to work, my brain goes, oh, okay, good. But it's not actually changing the thing that is causing my condition, but it's changing me into a different situation. So, Beth, what would you write about yourself being in denial if that's the case? What would you put in there?
Yeah, it does become a funny question, doesn't it? Because this idea that the best I could probably do is, and I think of like one of our friends, Lauren, how the idea of flying, and it's at this point, it's so hard to know because there's such a trusting relationship that she will talk about the fact that she's pretty sure she can fly. And yet, because she trusts you, Teepa.
Yep. And we're not talking airplanes.
Correct. Yes. We're talking winged creatures jumping off roofs. And we don't know whether or not this is just a joke and she's joking around with a friend, or is there a possibility in Lewy body that she might be thinking she can fly and there's a risk of her jumping off her roof? I mean, it's surreal. It's absurd, but it's also something to think about. And I think that putting here, I could see Lauren writing, Teepa says I can't fly.
Right.
I'm not in denial at all, but she thinks that's denial, I'm sure. So I might even have some perspective here, even if I'm in denial, possibly.
So the problem about denial is it's so much easier to see in someone else and to label in someone else than it is to see in ourselves. So by going through this exercise, the goal is to help recognize denial is the inability of my brain in that moment to process what it is that you're trying to get me to appreciate from your perspective. Because I just can't do it.
And that's such a great example. I think the other, to talk about this in terms of like, what it is that people are thinking I'm denying or they're saying about me. But even I think that there's even that next place of progressing through this understanding or not, where the perspective on denial could actually be, I do not want to deal with X, Y, and Z right now. And I can't, I'm not going to. And I think that it may have a place in denial, even though denial has such a negative connotation. It may be actually protective.
It may be protective, and it may also be a way of my brain coping with what else I can do. So denial may actually be my brain saying, that's a hole. I can't go in the hole. I'm not going in the hole. There's a hole. I think there might be a hole, but I'm not going to go in the hole. I'm going to stay over here where I am. And as long as I'm where I am, I'm fine. I mean, I can get this to work. So what do you mean I can't drive? I can drive. Watch me. And so what I'll show you are the things I am able to do. What I can't envision is what I can't see, which is it's just a hole. I'm not doing it on purpose. I just can't see the hole. I can't see where I'm having trouble because I can't see where I'm having trouble. I see that I can still drive. What I can't see is how much I'm weaving. I can't see how much when I go to make a turn, I sit and I sit and I sit, or I until something actually impacts in such a way that I'm having trouble with it. So I think one of our biggest challenges is this box called denial and our opinion about denial, or our thoughts or feelings about denial. And yet an inability to recognize, could it be me who's in denial, that she actually has always been a risk taker. She continues to be a risk taker. And it is not my job to try to change her from being a risk taker. What I want to do is acknowledge, yeah, she's a risk taker. And with her lack of ability to be accurate in ability, the risk is higher than it's ever been for lots of potential problems. So I'm going to pause here because I'm really curious in this workbook idea. Christine and Beth, and even Emilio, if you were in a situation where you were living with someone living with dementia, how could you use this workbook, do you think? How might you try using this workbook and this idea? What might you do you think, that would help us start to have some sort of conversation early on? This is not someone who's really far into dementia. They're just in the beginning state of having significant brain change. What are you thinking?
The first thing that comes to my mind is the first thing we talked about, the donut. But how to do it, even taking somebody to a donut shop or buying some actual donuts, putting them on a plate, enjoying them together, and then starting to talk about it. And seeing where that conversation goes. And that's when starting to talk about some of these questions might happen. But that's the first thing that came to my mind as far as how I could immediately use it, like today or tomorrow.
I was trying to see if I got a better signal here than where I was before. That's what you see, me trying to relocate just a little. Is it any better or is it the same? About the same. Oh, well, sorry. I continue to try. I'm not in denial, am I? But it keeps changing. And even though I'm trying, I can't tell whether it's working or not, or whether you perceive me as not trying. So I'll try some things to see if I can make it better. It may not work, but the only way I'll know whether it works or not is to try. And I think that's what we're saying about this workbook. This is that creative solution, is really stepping back and going, okay, am I screening and assessment? Am I the one that thinks something is this way? And maybe it's not. I mean, the idea of what's going on here for us is a really important one. Beth, have you got some other thoughts?
Yeah, it made me think about this idea of like, how would I start off the conversation? And even somebody asked in the, Chris, I think, asked in the comments about, can I have a conversation with someone who has impaired cognitive functioning? And I really liked that question, the fact that clearly they were considering it. And this idea that maybe it's starting off with a plate of donuts and just making a connection with somebody. But I also think as well, it's a way to guide and have questions that I don't have to think about. And I think that's the biggest thing here. I could be someone who I know I don't want things the way they are. I don't want to be in this place with somebody where we're just existing and trying to get through this time that we've been given, rather than the opportunity that we have seen happen, where it can be this gift. And it's a incredibly tarnished and a dusty and a dirty gift sometimes, and nobody really wants it, but we have it, and it's what we do with it. But I can't do anything with it until I work past the grief that is real.
Yeah.
And sometimes I have to do that away from my person, and sometimes I have to do it together. Because my guess is, if I'm here, a lot of my friends, I met them after dementia diagnosis, and we've even got marriages that we know that happened after diagnoses. But for many of us, we're starting in a place when it comes to family. I knew you before dementia entered the picture. We have a relationship. Do I really want that relationship to be gone tomorrow? Or what do I want? And that's really hard to do. I feel like this workbook gives me questions that helps me lay that out when I am struggling myself. honestly.
So a lot of this workbook is you look in the mirror at yourself and then you have an opportunity to switch it around. So I will say what I might do with someone who might have some cognitive impairment. I would say, hey, Christine, tell us a little bit about how it feels like it's going for you with driving.
Well, Teepa, I drive fine.
So
How's
it feels
going
like
with
it's
you?
going fine. Well, some days better than others. I notice when there's a lot of traffic and it's really crowded on the roads, that it takes a whole lot more for me to feel safe than it used to. And also when it's sunrise or sunset with the car, I notice that I have more challenges. Any of that at all for you? Or that's really that is not bothering you?
Well, yes, when it gets darker, I don't like driving it at dark.
So not so much at dark.
Not so much. And I've gotten to where I cannot listen to the radio while I'm driving, especially in traffic. I have to turn it off.
Okay. So you find that you turn it off because it lets you focus more?
It does. Oh, and I used to one-hand it. But I noticed earlier I was holding.
You're doing your 10 and 2, huh? You get the 10 and the 2?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to pause this because I want you to realize how I got her to be able to identify. For me, I expressed where was my loss? What's harder for me now? What am I having difficulty with that I didn't used to have difficulty with? And that's when at first I'm fine because there's this fear of I'm going to take something away from you if you say you have any issues. And when I said, I'm having some challenges, it became okay to say I've made some. Now, what's interesting is Christine has done some compensatory strategies. She's done some creative modifications here. So she actually did notice that change, the issue. And so what she's done is she says, I used to do it one-handed. Now I do 10 and 2. I used to listen to the radio. Now I don't do that. So what she's describing to me is I'm experiencing some changes in my abilities, particularly in the ability to stay focused when there's distraction. I am having more difficulty to guide and direct when I don't have both hands on the wheel. I need to center my attention and focus. She is telling me in many ways how she is compensating or how she's gotten a creative solution to this challenging situation. What did you actually notice about me? What'd you notice, Christine?
You're supporting me and connecting with me didn't make me feel like I should not be driving, but made me feel good that I tried something.
Well, and what you notice is I didn't describe anything I'm doing to change it.
No, you didn't.
And here's the tricky part. Christine is not going to be able, if she is working with cognitive impairment, she is not going to be able to serve that role for me. And this is where looking at how we're using this book, having a third party involved who can listen and work with Christine and then listen and work with me. So Teepa, so you're having more trouble driving at sunrise and sunset. Have you done anything with that or what do you do? Well, I mean, when we have to go somewhere, we have to go somewhere. Of the two of us, which of us is actually in denial that this change where I have really significant I don't, but I have significant cataracts where I'm not seeing well enough to drive and I'm still driving. Which of the two of us is actually in a state of denial?
I'm going to have Christine drive you, given what I've heard.
There we go. And so this idea that, one of us is going to like take care of and lift the other person. I think our message with this booklet, Creative Solutions, is sometimes it's really taking the time to explore situations and explore where people are and trying to negotiate this with more questions than statements about the other.
Oh, I love that. So it's I statements, it sounds like you're talking about.
You got it. More I statements, but also more curiosity.
Mm.
And Beth empowered Christine to be my driver versus the other way around. So she's saying, actually, I might trust Christine a little bit better than Teepa. But that she didn't say, Teepa, that's not safe, which is very tempting. All right, so let's pick a whole nother page, because we can do this similar thing. What I hope you're getting, tell me a little bit about what you're taking away from this webinar using this resource. That's what you're thinking.
I thought about this in staff and in a facility use as, trying to figure out how we as a team do a better job of problem solving with people living with dementia. I thought about in families. I'd never thought about that third person. Bringing in that outside person that has perspective, that literally has the game. I'm not even in the same city, maybe. Yeah. It's no skin off my nose if you drive or not. Because I think about all those times when we hear in consultation where you have, let's say, a husband and wife team, or, two wives that have been together for a long time, and one has always been the driver and the other one's not. Mm-hmm. And then the one that was the driver gets dementia. And so, or worse yet, the one that gets, so I now, as the person that doesn't drive, I'm going to have them drive and I'm just going to give them directions. And as a consultant and someone who has dementia, I say, oh, that face that for me, that Teepa's froze on. It was, ooh, and then, ooh. And then I go, huh. I could actually see another person almost bringing this to a clinical psychologist, having a conversation with a PAC consultant where we use this and it brings up these opportunities to recognize these things. And it's not just about brain change and denial and grief and dementia. There's other parts here as well. Yeah. On this book.
Yeah. And so what we didn't ask is, so you're thinking you'll be able to cue them which way to go and to drive with you in the navigation position. Tell me a little bit about your experience in navigating.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, you do not want me in the navigation seat.
Yeah.
If you're not good with left, well, I don't do left and right.
That's a great way for my husband and I to have ended our marriage if one of us navigates or not. Yeah.
Yeah. So this idea of who we are as individuals matters. It's not just about the dementia and it's not just about grief and loss. It's truly about who have we been and who are we now. So let's go to page 16. Let's take a look at page 16.
I love it. It's funny. It's the next one we all pulled up because it is so different and you don't expect it in a dementia problem solving book, which it's not. This is about creative solutions.
Mm-hmm. And so we set it up. Take a look at that arrow. And what do you notice about it? I'm just curious visually, what do people notice about that?
It's a continuum.
It's a continuum.
There's not a green and red side to it either.
No, there's not a right or a wrong side. There's not a, this is better, this is worse side. Mm-hmm. What do you notice about under the arrow or maybe within the arrow? What have you got in your arrow that Beth being visual, she really is not even commenting on, which is really interesting for people who are verbal linguistic.
I was going to say, you said within the arrow, there's not a hard color transition. It kind of, well, not a hard color line. It kind of transitions and fades.
Yeah.
Back and forth.
And then, of course, we have the word extrovert and introvert, but we also go through others. And so this is what's underneath there are some little boxes. And so if you have more that you would tick on one side than on the other side, it leans you more over this direction. So if you had everything over here under the introvert going, check, 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 this is me, then you probably are further out on the arrow. If, however, you've got some 50-50, you're probably in the middle. And what you'll notice down below is we're asking you to look at you. So what does it mean for you, the person who's doing this exercise? And what does it mean for the person living with dementia? Where are they? Because we know that two introverts, okay, that's a different dynamic than an introvert and an extrovert, or two extroverts. And some people who are more toward the middle tend to be glue. People who have flip-flops, they go either way, tend to be more split. And when they have one need, it's very extreme. And then they switch and they have another need, and that's extreme. And you can have any of those four and be absolutely normal. It's just that we want to think about these things because it's important to recognize when dementia is in the house. This in and of itself can be a huge deciding factor in how well we'll do with one another. Because if I'm not getting my needs met as a partner, because my person is an extreme extrovert and they want to be connected all the time, and I use that word all the time. When they're asleep, we aren't connected, but they may want to physically have me near them. So for me, if I'm a strong introvert, it's like all the time, because even though we're not consciously talking or being with each other, you're still on top of me. I can't go to the bathroom without you waking up. And so that sense of all the time, it really says, boy, we're going to need a third party. Because the only way we're both going to be satisfied, and helping us see that, recognize, oh, well, the challenge is we're very different people. It doesn't mean we don't love each other. It just means we're very different people. And we're each going to need something for ourselves so we'll be able to be together effectively. So this workbook, all of it is designed to be an opportunity to really look at things, think about things, and then write or talk about things, and then trying to then consider doing something perhaps a little different. So it's designed to give you a springboard for change, but it doesn't demand change. So it's the tool that is meant to be used as a resource, not an answer book, but a consider this kind of book. So it is time for us to wrap it up and see if folks have any questions and any comments and any thoughts. Christine, you could show, or Beth could show, because she has the electronic copy, a few more of the pages or the chapters, because we have numbers of chapters in here. And each of those chapters we think have value because it lets us look at some of the features of what's going on. So we go through a very basic appreciation of the different gem states. We also go through environment. So what we're looking at is, what do you notice about what's going on in the 6 pieces of the puzzle? And we talk about things that are part of the person and things that are part of what we could do. We talk about different dementias. Oh man, we have the core stuff in here. But it's designed that you can work on this all by yourself, work and come together, work together, or just take a look at it and see what of it in this moment is the thing that might be helpful to you. So I will pause this here. Beth, you can see if there's anything else that you want to make sure people get a chance to see. Any questions from the audience that you guys have been able to notice in chat that we haven't tried to respond to already? Because I think we tried to do a few in our response mode.
Yeah, I noticed a couple of people, the way they were asking the question, it showed me that they were asking a question out of curiosity, but it's also a place of enlightenment. It was the amount of language can change dramatically with a person. and yet I can still have communication that's happening. And so the questions were, can I have this conversation with somebody, that is very different language, or the use of language is, how we talk to a person. It actually then can facilitate that because it's an exercise, or maybe that it has a greater richness for me with the language, but yet for somebody else, it may not. It makes me think about things, and maybe I can enter into a conversation about those.
Mm-hmm. So the words that we put at the top of the chapters are getting people thinking. And then from that thinking, we're hoping that it would generate, which it did for us, those questions. And as you consider those questions, it might get you to wonder if that is why maybe you're experiencing some of what you're experiencing. And therefore, if you are experiencing that, what could we decide to try to shift or change? And that's where those intrinsic, extrinsic factors come in. And so if I were working with kids, because I saw the kids, I would pick little pieces, and I would actually do the plate of donuts and have folks think. And it's like, but if you only had donuts, would that get to be too much sometimes? Yeah. And so sometimes being with daddy or grandma might get to be a little too much because of the combination of what's going on. So I'm just wondering, is it possible? Do we want to think about the possibility of some of the time when I'm with grandma or with daddy, you may want to spend some time doing something else? Because I know you like to do some other things. I wonder if you want to either play on some swings for a little bit, or you'd like to be in the sandbox for a little bit. So the idea that these conversations don't need to be deep, long, and detailed to help kids sometimes recognize, oh, yeah, I think it's just that it's too much. It's too much. I think it might be too much. So a little bit is good, but too much is too much, huh? And acknowledging for them, enough is enough. And I need you to help create that space for me so that, yes, I can do it and it's okay. And then when it's not, I need permission to engage otherwise, because what we don't want is button heads and I don't like this. I don't like how you're talking to me. You're being mean. That's not what I said. We don't want to get into arguments about it. And so respecting that I have a developing brain and then I have a brain that's trying hard to stay in space and time and yet has some changes. And I've got to really go, do I need help or have I got this? And I think all too often we think we might have this when what we might need is some help, because being in the middle, we could talk about sandwiches where you're getting squished. And I think anytime that I'm working in that space, I need to appreciate this is hard because I'm getting pressure from both sides. Maybe it's the supporters that are not appreciating what I think is important, or maybe it's the person and the combination. And what I want to say is I can be the sandwich, but boy, I've got to be really aware that I might need some additional support for me if I am in that sandwich position. And I think we underappreciate that as people who care for individuals and don't recognize how often we might have our own, I have a need. And it's not just going to the bathroom when I can. It is actually getting support for what I'm trying to do, which is handle a very challenging situation. And the art of substitution versus subtraction. Because I don't need a hole developing in my brain, my relationships, my sense of self. I need to stay fit and well, or this is going to end up being a smushed sandwich. So, all right, Christine, Beth, anything else?
Yeah, there's a great question somebody posed in the chat, and they were asking, we have any suggestions for how to use this with teen children who are great odds with their mother with dementia? and who sees the kids as negative no matter what they do or say.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah. So when we're talking about teenagers, we're talking about human beings who haven't got a fully developed prefrontal cortex yet. And what they're experiencing is a lot of pushing back and forth. And so this is the situation where working individually with the parties, and again, looking at that third person, because otherwise you're going to find it to be that sandwich place of trying to figure out how to get both these people comfortable. And really what they might need is a little more space, but we don't want them giving up and going away, either one of them. And right now we have a lot of this. So if we were to go back to grief and loss, we have one group at least that's probably angry and feeling really frustrated with all of this change. And we have another group who might be feeling abandoned and like nobody cares and you're taking theirs. And so this idea of bargaining, you always take their side. You want me to do, and this sense of unfairness, which is this bargaining piece of grieving. Then we want to really start going, okay, well, both people are hurting. So maybe figuring out how to help recognize where they are in the grief and the loss part before we try to get them together to do something, because both of them are really grieving the relationship that used to be. Mom can't understand why she can't be mom, and kids, those kids are just misbehaving or being bad, and the kids are feeling mom's always mad. I never do, maybe separate work before we try together work. And both parties are going to need support because the synapses they're building are primitive, more emotional synapses. Those synapses are coming from the amygdala because everything is being threatened. I'm not getting my very basic needs met of feeling comfortable. And this is painful. And I'm not liking any of this. And the person who should be providing, my intake and taking care of things is not doing it in a way that's working for me. And those kids are not fulfilling me. And so this idea, we need more space and more work and more support. I think that bigger step back is probably what's needed.
Yeah. So this workbook isn't something we would advise in place of a professional intervention from a psychologist, mental health provider. And I know those are really hard to get at this point, especially with all the strain on the system. But what it sounds like you're saying is that when we're talking about developing brains, teens or younger kids, that we will, without intervention, if we don't help children find place of safety and pathways forward, what develops is a traumatic developing brain, or a brain developed in trauma, rather than a brain that can process negative events and figure out where safety is and what doesn't feel safe and have a good balance in life. So it does sound like with teens, especially, I got to tell you, either way, dementia is hard. And if we're talking about developing brains, I think that's a really good point of view to have that you described, Teepa, which is this is going to take some processing through because it's hard enough with a fully formed brain.
And I think what we know is that frequently grandchildren work more readily and easily with a grandparent, not just because of older adult, young person. It often happens because there's this space between. And so that capability of being more flexible. And so some of us who are doing this work went into it when we took care and supported people in our lives, that we were able to do that thing, and we were drawn to that thing. But equally, I will say there were equal number of people who said, could never do something like that, because after that, and it's, are you drawn to, or are you pushed away? And I think, Beth's right. We underestimate the power it has to change us. So it's a stepping stone, and I would view it as a stepping stone. If there's no conversation going on, it's a possibility of opening up some conversation. If there's trauma going on, maybe it's time to help get support for that trauma. And it can start with little bites, but we got to start somewhere. Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, I hope it was helpful to sort of look at this resource and see what some of the possibilities are for working with it. And I want to thank you. I apologize again. Everywhere I go, it seems like I have a little internet issue, but thanks for hanging out, working with me, and having the team here. Emilio, thank you.
Emilio, I'm wondering, do you still have the cute doggy on your lap? We could end with that little wonderful dopamine sort of thing. I think we should end every webinar with that.
Oh dear. Very sweet. Thanks for that positive dopamine hit.
There you go.
Was that puppy? Thanks, everybody. Take care.